So with the high poly completed, now we got to start thinking about the low poly. And the way that I do it is I tend to go a little slower at this stage because I like to organize stuff. So what I've already done is taken all the things that make up this high poly mesh and I've put them into their own group item called HP. See, there's my mesh out booleans, my instances, and my regular mesh items. Now the reason I do this is because I want to keep the original mesh intact and exactly the way that it was designed to reference it later, basically. So I will duplicate this entire hierarchy, and that'll take a second. But the reason I do that, is like I said, so I can have the old one around, and I'll rename this one to HP_X, X for exploded, which will make sense here shortly. So with HPX created, now I need to start to firm things up, I guess, in terms of procedural meshes and things like that. So in this case, it's really just the mesh op booleans. I need to freeze them so I can have an actual mesh item and not this procedural mesh hanging around. So I'm going to right click this, hit duplicate and freeze, and that gives me a pure mesh item that I can just throw out here into the root folder. Then delete this. Then burrow in here, choose that green item again, dupe and freeze, pull that out here, and delete this. Now that gives me just straight up mesh items that that can be manipulated if I want to or anything else. They're no longer procedural, basically. Okay. And just for clarity's sake, let's go ahead and just change their color back to nothing. Now, since this is the high poly mesh, we got to keep that in mind still, because we don't want to start deleting stuff, that we don't need, because we're not at that stage yet. So what I will do is start to walk through, and it does take a little time because I need to figure out what needs to go with what. But like for example, these floaters being all one mesh item was probably not the best idea that I've ever had, but that's okay because I can copy them out and paste them into this layer, and then I have all of this as one mesh item because I would, and this and these, this all looks like one unit, so there's really no reason for that not to be all together. So then I'll take that and just give it a push, and we'll push it up to maybe here just to get it free of the thing below it. This hole doesn't really matter because the low poly is not going to go that far. Same thing happens here. I'm going to grab what floaters this needs. I'm going to put them locally into this mesh item. Grab these, push this up, and that's going to be its own mesh item. Now this piece is going to be its own thing, so we'll push it out. This is going to be its own thing and push it out. And in reality, what I should do is grab the stem and make that its own thing as well, because there's really no reason for it not to be. I'll delete the caps off, leave this all intact. Now the feet are kind of a weird issue with this mesh because, well, not weird, I guess, just I know they're going to be there and I know I need to deal with them. I tend not to like little things that stick off of meshes, but in this case we have them, so I'm just going to go with it. So the concern here, well, let me just continue to break this up a little bit. There's a little more to go because we really should separate this this bottom piece from that middle piece because they are separate things. So let me go ahead and select all these instances, pull this down. Oh, missed my floaters. Well, let's just do this. Let's pull it down to a predictable amount. We'll say 25 centimeters. Grab this, that. Pull that out. put it into this mesh item, pull it down negative 25 centimeters. Okay, that puts it in the same spot. Okay. The teeth are also separate. So I'm going to take those. Now here's where the rounded edge shader, well, actually not in this case. Hold on. We'll talk about that in a second. Let me move these out to here because we're going to unwrap those separate. Now the feet. Okay, so if I go ahead and render this out, you can see the rounded edge shader is connecting the feet to this underside. And that's what I want, obviously. But if I just grab this foot and drag it away, then it's no longer going to be doing that. So what I need to do is to duplicate that foot. Is I duplicate that foot mesh item and drag it out. And what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to UV this and once. And then at the end of the bake process, just move it back, copy it around like the other one. And because they're all the same shape, it's going to work out. It's kind of abstract and weird to talk about right now, but you'll see this in action shortly. Now I've gone ahead and made some additional copies of things that I felt we could eliminate on the low poly mesh, or optimize, I should say. For example, this little stubby piece here is duplicated around here, so we only need to do it once. And the same with this piece here, that's copied around, we can just do it once. We're not going to do a lot of fancy mirroring on this one, but we're definitely going to be duplicating parts a lot. And you'll see that it really makes no visual difference to the end piece. So when you're faced with something like this, and needing to low poly it, the best method I found is to once again make a copy. So we'll duplicate that entire hierarchy out, call it LPX, and hide the high poly. Now you can start making decisions that are relevant to just the low poly. So as where the high poly needed to have these floaters and stuff stick around because they were obviously part of what was going on, the low poly doesn't need that. And all of these meshes around here aren't necessary in the low poly. They can go. And the reason why I say they can go is that when the high poly gets baked to the low poly, the rounded edge shader is going to leave an imprint of each of those pieces on the low poly. Then we just take this piece of geometry, copy it back over there, and duplicate it in a circle, and it will look like it belongs there. Yeah, again, I keep saying this, but this will all make sense in the end, trust me. So I'm going to proceed just to tear things off of this low poly starter mesh anyway, that don't need to be here. All these instances can go. Really, I think I can just kill the floaters off of there. All of these meshes inside of here no longer have a purpose. And we'll deal with the Boolean here in a minute, but this top one we'll probably just do a retopo on, and this bottom one we will do something a little fancier. But this is all okay. There's nothing here that I can really delete. Down here we can delete all the feet meshes that are sitting around because they're going to get copied back in later. And all of these instances around here aren't necessary because they're high poly detail that we're going to bake down. Okay, that's clean. That's clean. Floaters down here. Don't forget those kill those. And I think that gets us to a relatively clean spot in terms of high poly detail being punted. Okay, and as a final act of setup, I'm going to grab all of these. I'm going to give them a low poly material, just a custom material that I can, so I can tell when the low poly is being edited. We'll make it light green, just so it's obvious. So anytime I see light green polys, then I know I'm dealing with a low poly mesh. Okay, I said we were going to retopo this, and we'll do that later. What I want to talk about right now is this piece. This was done with Booleans. Well, this cut here was done with Booleans. And while we could retopo this by hand, it's not the friendliest thing in the world. Oh, this is hanging out from the high poly, I think, still. Okay. So I could see some extra lines popping in there, and I didn't know what it was. That's what it was. But okay, so this was created with Booleans, and while I could retopo this, I don't really want to. So one of the ways we can tackle something like this is to go back to the high poly mesh, select that Boolean operation. We'll scroll down here. Wait. Oh, sorry, this is the frozen one. So go back to the original high poly mesh. Now this mesh is being generated through this Boolean operation. And if I go into the operators and I say, okay, so there's the operators for this mesh. If I grab those, and I'm going to make a new file here just so I can work in a safe environment, and come back over here, grab the subtractive mesh from there, and throw it into my temp level as well. Now, once I have both of these here, I can go ahead and start the low polying process over here. But the important thing is going to be to convert them back to faces. Make sure they're both sitting as faces. And then this thing, I'm going to leave this as it is right now, and then we'll clean it up later maybe. But since this is all just regular mesh items and it's low poly now, I can just use my regular subtraction tools to punch out that hole. And yeah, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it did work. So let me, okay, grab this, maybe pull that off the bottom of there. Okay. So we can eliminate this ridge because that's just going to come through in the bake. So actually, let me punch that. There we go. This whole ridge is unnecessary. This support loop's unnecessary. Then if I take this mesh here, this whole inside is unnecessary. That isn't needed. Then I can grab this, bridge it, and then kill that edge loop. Kill that edge loop. That stitches that up, or it should anyway. And I have my hole clipped out nicely. Okay, then each of these lines that I had or support loops that I had inserted to add that extra creasing, these can get deleted because I don't need these anymore. Not on the low poly anyway. Delete that. Go over here to this piece and delete that panel line. I'll probably just delete this whole bottom face for now just to get it out of my face. merge that back face. All right. This then should just be a matter of bridging, splitting, and then delete the ones on the side. Okay. Then I think if I do this, although it is feeling like there must be some extra vertices laying around somewhere or something, because this stopping here is not really the way that should work, but it's fine. I'll just select all these because I want to be able to merge the top and bottom now and get rid of this cut right here. Delete that and have everything still be happy. Good. Good. Okay. Now this was the result of the Boolean, and we can clean this up a little bit. Just, you know, to eliminate some polygon spew. And then since we're not going to see the inside really, we can do like the old trick where you select like every second edge and collapse it. And that should work out okay. We probably don't need the polygon in the back, but I'm not going to stress it too hard. I'm going to merge these out like that, clean that up. All right, looks good. Up here, this all, a little splooge there. This all seems not too terrible. I might try killing that loop. And then inside of here, yeah, again, we're not really going to see in here, so you can optimize away some of those edges. All right. Yeah, I do have some concerns about this dip here, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, let's take it back to the let's take it back up here. If I turn back on my low poly and I just make a new mesh item inside of there and paste it in, and we'll give it the low poly texture. Yeah, that shouldn't be down that far. So when I was clipping, I got a little too aggressive, but it's okay. We just pull it up so it's level. Right, that seems fine. And you know what? I think I'm going to put that ridge back because that was serving some purpose. You got to be careful that you're not sacrificing your silhouette too much, or at all, really. You know, the ideal is that you don't sacrifice it, you know, at all. But you know, reality states that you probably will eventually, or in some way, I should say. Okay, so now we have a low poly shell here that has the subtraction piece, and now I can see that since I've got it isolated, we never actually see this, so I can just straight up delete that. And you know what? I think we're going to delete this. And then just sort of scale these in a bit. Just a bit. You know, like 99%. We shouldn't be able to really see any cracking going on there. All right, well, we'll pull it in. Yeah, okay, we'll do 97%. Pull it all the way in and make sure that it is actually stuck or hiding the geometry below it. Okay. So I was just saying how we have to preserve the silhouette. The problem we have is that, well, it's not a problem, but it's a decision. These pipes that are sticking up, they serve the silhouette, but my gut feeling is that we can get rid of them. I feel that we can get rid of them because I think your typical view is going to be back here or so, and as long as they're represented on the normal map, I think they'll be fine. And these are the kinds of decisions that you go through, yeah, pretty much constantly when dealing with low poly meshes. So this piece now needs to get low poly, and I can see that it's not even visible this far down. Okay. Now this this is currently sub-D'd. If I take it out of sub-D mode, you can see we have a lot of extra loops and things that are in here that really aren't helping it to preserve its shape. And and again, let me reference my high poly mesh so I can see, okay, that inner thing is really not even visible. So this can all go away, I think. Actually, if you're going to kill that, just kill that too. Okay. So that'll be good for that, I believe. So coming down to something like the little turn handle thing, when that is sub-D'd, it's, it has some smooth detail around the sides and stuff, but stuff that's round like this tends to have its own set of issues, because when I take it out of sub-D, which the low poly is obviously, it balloons up a little bit. It puffs out slightly. So I'll go into the local coordinate space and I'll give it a slight tug backwards again. Usually 99.5. I don't know if you can see that on the video or not. It is the correct amount depending on the two axes you need to pull it in on. Or maybe I'm just a little too anal about that. I'm not sure. But anyway, now that we're here, I'm going to select all of that detail and delete it because we don't need this on the low poly. I think we actually don't need any of that, and we can just bridge that solid because that'll all just read fine, and then delete those two edge loops. Delete that edge loop. This whole thing back here is actually not necessary, so I can kill that, collapse that. Since we're in the back here, I think we can actually get away with a whole lot of collapsing of edges, because you're just never going to see back here. Turn that into some quads and just call that a day, because that'll bake out clean. This you're never going to notice. Okay, and then in here, this whole thing, we're going to just shoot to bake that whole flat. And since it's all one thing, we'll just do that and make it quads. And I think that will be fine. Although, to be proper, we should probably collapse every second edge on that, because you're just not going to notice. Right. So this will be the handle piece. Now, something like this little thing, I'm sure you've already have figured out what's going to happen here. If I turn this back on and hit tab to pull it out, it kind of balloons it up. So local coordinate space, knock it down a little bit. 9.5, 9.5. And since it's just a cylinder, I'll knock out every second edge on that and just leave it with 12 is a little high for something this small, stuck behind here, but this is really just a demo, so I'm not going to worry too much about getting the perfect optimizations on this stuff. And just repeat that same pattern here. 9.5, 9.5. Then back poly is not needed on the low poly for sure. I will this whole thing can be joined. This whole edge loop can be removed. This actually, the whole thing can just be reduced like that. Delete these edges, quads, and then I think that will be sufficient. What if I kill this? That'll probably be okay, to be honest. I think I'm just going to go with that, and maybe every second edge inside of there just to be, because the key with that is that you don't see the silhouette of this is the outer edges, on this piece. The inside edges you don't really notice, especially if you can't get close to them, which you really can't in this case. So I am perfectly happy with reducing those and just making them just have enough geo to hold, to hold the normal information. It doesn't have to be great at it, it just has to do it. Okay. Now another technique that we get into is, well, perhaps not on that one, something like, let's see, let me go low poly here on this. It's being disagreeable with me. All right, here we are. Right. So there is another technique we can use for reducing high poly to low poly. Something like this loop that goes around the outside of here that we want to have on there, but it's Catmull Clark right now, and if I just pop it out, it might be a little jagged. Although maybe that's fine. Well, let me turn the exploded mesh back on. What if I hit that with a push, just kind of pushed it in a little bit, 0.5 millimeter, that kind of thing. That might actually be all right. Yeah, you know what, let's just go with that. There is a technique where you can take your high poly mesh, freeze it, then delete every second edge loop. That's kind of a gloss. It's kind of a glossed over version, but that is, the basics of how it works. And then you end up with a low poly mesh. Okay, so if I was doing this like that, okay. I think I've covered the major things I'm going to be doing here, except for topoing this. So let's retopo this part of the top because we said we would. Let me get a good look at this first. Yeah, you can see that interior polygon in there, so that ring is important. Okay, so let me come back over here, and maybe we'll grab these and just start from these because those are already pretty much the right shape. I will jump down. Yes, but we're going to kill this lip at the top because we don't need that. Excellent. Okay. And we'll do our, where'd the, there we are. Yeah, I did. I'm like hiding stuff and losing track of what I'm doing. But, okay, we'll start him off, let's say, here. That's a pretty good spot. Grabbing this, to retopo, he really has to extrude up, do an edge extrude, scale it out again, till it gets to where, till it gets to the top of there. Okay. Actually, maybe I'll just do this. That's probably good enough, actually. That's enough detail to hold it. I'll pull this down to here, so we're at the bottom of that thing instead. Extrude the edges up, but also scale them out slightly because there's a bit of a bump there. So I think what we're going to do here is I'm just going to put some music on and we're going to speed the video up and I'm going to finish up this low poly. You'll see me doing the same techniques again and again. So yeah, just zone out and let's get this done. So as a final step here, what I will do is I will select all the low poly chunks that I've been dealing with, and I'll merge them together into one mesh. Then I can toggle them on and off, toggle all the meshes on and off, and just make sure that I've covered all the stuff that I wanted to have covered. There's a few things to point out here. On this bottom piece here, we only need these polys to be on the low poly mesh because the mesh never actually separates, and these pieces fill in the floor below the teeth, but there's no other floor chunks that we need. So stuff like that gets done, and I reduced the size of this hole to from a solid hole to just being kind of a little bit of an inset. It just saves a little bit of UV space, but that adds up. It adds up. So this looks pretty good. This looks like I've got everything. Everything that's high poly has a light green component covering it, and we're ready to move on to the UV process. So that'll be in the next video. See you then.